get customers first. I think if you can find customers, you're going to find investment. And so many times I talk with startup founders and they're like, if I only can get the money, if I can get $10 million, I can build this thing and we can go get our customers.
Mm.
And every pitch contest you ever go to, and if you ask any judge or you ask anybody that does, why did you pick the winner? It's always they had an existing customer base. They had already proven it was. So if you can go out and take your concept and get customers around it, people willing to pay money for the idea you have, you are far more likely to attract investment. You're far more likely to be able to grow your idea, and you're far more likely to make it successful.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's built several businesses to 7- and 8-figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where we focus on startups and small businesses and helping them with their patents and trademarks. Today we have another great guest on the podcast. His name is Nathan, and is it Pio?
Payo.
Peo,
Payo.
sorry. So Nathan Peo, or Nate Peo, and I'll give just a quick introduction. So he worked in residential construction, I think, for about 15 years, had some successes, a lot of failures, kind of a mixture of both, and then but also had an entrepreneur itch that he wanted to scratch. And so made the transition from doing the industrial network, spent quite a long time building your network, building the people in your circle, so to speak, and that will lead you to where you're at today and what you're doing. So with that, welcome onto the podcast, Nate.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I gave just maybe a brief introduction of kind of what you do, where you're at, and where you got to where you're at today. But maybe if you want to help us start with your journey and give us a bit more detail.
Yeah, no problem. So I'm one of those people that had an entrepreneurship itch for a lot of my life. I think it started probably with reading the Rich Dad Poor Dad books and early in my career, and I always had this like idea of creating a business and doing something big with my life. And throughout my journey, I worked a 9 to 5 job for many years, and I also tried some businesses, and they've all had limited success. And ended up shutting them down. But every time,
So and I know I'm jumping right into your story, but before you do, so walking or diving just a bit deeper into each of those. So what was the 9 to 5, and then what were some of the businesses that you started, either the successful and or failed? But maybe dive in just a little bit deeper there.
okay, yeah. So I've been in real estate development, construction related career most of my life. So my first business I started was a landscape business, and I had, I guess, visions of grandeur, that I could go out and create a business because I knew construction, I knew how to do things, I knew how to build, and I could just build this big business that would be very successful. And what I think I learned early in that one is I created a job for myself and not really a business.
Mm.
That was my first lesson, is like, hey, sometimes a business makes sense and sometimes it doesn't. This one, it didn't, because it just became a real time consuming effort just to kind of keep things afloat. And somebody said earlier on my business is, hey, you can either be really, really small in the construction trade, or you can be really, really big. And really, really small means you personally are doing the work, and that's it. That's as big as you are. And
Mm.
then really big means you got, hundreds of employees working for you. And if you're kind of like anywhere in between, you're not going to do so good.
Mm.
And that's where I was, is right in between. And a lot of it had to do with, I didn't know how to run a business. I didn't know how to put systems in place. And I didn't really know how to sell, have an idea, have a differentiator. It's just kind of this, you know, business that had nothing really to it, nothing that stood apart from anybody else. So I ended up shutting that down after about 3 years. And then I went back to work in the construction industry building houses. And then me and my wife decided we were going to start a business. And we had this idea This would have been about 2010. But if you remember, like there's an app called Red Laser, and you could scan barcodes at the stores, and it would tell you like prices. Like if you're at Target, like a box of diapers might be 10 cents cheaper on Amazon, or tell you where to go to buy it a little bit cheaper. Well, we had this idea of scanning wine labels, and it would tell you like stuff about the wine. Like, how do you know if this wine's any good? If you'd like it, what the ratings are, what the reviews would be like. So we're
Hmm.
like, hey, let's create this business around that. And at the time, we didn't know anything about tech, and we didn't know anything about how to build an app, but we knew some people that knew how to build websites. And after chatting with them and kind of going down this path of nobody knowing what we were doing, we realized like we didn't know how to build an app. So we just kind of pivoted and created an online wine shop.
Hmm.
And again, we ended up creating a business that was a job, but it wasn't really anything compelling or anything exciting or anything different about it that would be like, hey, we're really doing something cool in the space. We're just kind of like this Me Too business that competed on price, and it wasn't really successful. So
So
that one
diving
was
in, because I think that's an interesting distinguishing is between a job versus a business, right? So how do you kind of separate in my mind or in your mind the difference, and how did you kind of come to the realization that these are jobs, not businesses, and make that shift? Because I think that there's a lot of truth to that.
to me, a lot of the difference between a job and a business is, can the business be systematized that it has a chance to scale, and it can be not as dependent on you operating within it every day. Like, sure, you're going to run a business, you need to be the CEO of the business. But if your whole business revolves around whether or not you are there, and if you're not there for a day, the business doesn't really perform,
Hmm.
then you have a job. So in this case, they were always such a small scale operation that to bring on the right amount of people to scale up to a business, we didn't have the resources to bring them on, so we could never
Hmm.
make the leap. um, and I think a lot of businesses get stuck in that idea of like, you have this idea that you're just going to go run around and constantly feed the machine, and you'll just constantly get revenue coming in, but then whatever comes out just goes right back into paying your bills and paying yourself a little bit of wages, but you're never really able to grow, you're never able to really scale, and you're never really able to put like systems in place that kind of does things to make it more efficient.
Hmm.
And businesses can be small or they can be big, but jobs tend to always you know they cap out of what you're personally capable of doing, because you can't get any bigger than what you have time to do within a day. So that would
So
be my take on it.
no, and I think that's an interesting take. So one, I'm going to ask a follow-up question on that. So because it seems like, hopefully a lot of times startups are typically attached to a founder or a set of founders, right? Or founder and a co-founder. And so that, by that definition, you almost start out as a job, but then because, it is dependent on you in the sense that if you don't show up, if you only have a few people on your team or a founder or co-founder, you have to show up. And if you don't, then it, goes under. But if I were to put words in your mouth, if, or so to speak, it sounds like what you're saying is you need to have it as a business that you can grow, scale, and it goes into a place to where you're no longer so dependent on you or to one individual, but it's an actual business that runs. And if you're not there as a day to day, or if you're not always there doing everything, it can go on without you. Or you can take, the one that I always look or listen to, and on business things, is people say, hey, if you can take a month off of work and your business is still running without you, then you built a business. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Essentially, like as you are scaling a business, your responsibilities maybe grow. You're not doing the day-to-day work, but you're still managing like the strategy and the implementation and the growth and the finances and stuff like that. And I think you're looking at things in a bigger picture. And I had a mentor, and the way he would describe it was similar to what you described, like take a month off. And he said, well, a month off as a new business owner or startup, like that's probably not, you
Mm,
know, very likely going to happen. But he had this thing, it was like a thing of key performance indicators. It basically gave you a temperature check of your business, that if you were stranded on a deserted island and this was the only thing that was dropped to you by airmail every Monday, you could tell if your business was operating correctly or not. And if it wasn't, you'd have an idea of where to start
Hmm.
pushing your focus. So it might have things like your sales, or might have things like your quotes going out, or might have things like production rates, whatever was specific to your business. But it would say like, hey, if sales are down compared to where they're supposed to be, they would give you an indication of like, well, maybe revenues would be down too because we're not getting enough quotes out or something like that. It would give you some ideas to go look at it. And to me, that signified what makes the difference between a business and a
Hmm.
job. Is a job, you probably don't have time to be tracking those things and do anything with them. And a business, you have them and you live and die by this system that tells you how your business is like a baby, and it operates independently of you, but you're there to guide it. And then the job is just like everything's like on fire, and it's just, you're just constantly putting out things. You don't really know what's going on. So it's
Hmm.
hard for you to take a step back and look at, are the systems in place? Whether or not it's just you in the sole proprietorship or sole founder role, you still got systems you're tracking.
No, I think that's a good distinguishing and I think insightful. So as you did that now, and you're saying, okay, so you worked in residential construction for quite a period of time. You did, side hustles or startups and that alongside that, successful failures and those type of things. So how did you then, because now you're in a different industry, right? You kind of, I think when we talked a bit before the podcast, you were, you took, I had the idea that, hey, I'm going to focus on my network, build my network, did that for a period of time. So maybe if you can provide an insight, how did you kind of say I'm going to shift or adjust where I'm at, and how did you kind of land on that was the next phase of where you're going to go?
So it started off with this idea of like, after you've done a business and shut a business down, and done a business and shut a business down, you start telling yourself, I'm never doing that again. Like, right? I'm not going to
Hmm.
go down this path and do dumb things again. But if you're entrepreneurial, you do a lot of dumb things, and you forget those lessons, and you go, I want to try something else, something bigger again. So
Hmm.
I was having this itch coming up, and I was like, I want to go start something, but one, I don't know what it is. I don't have an idea. And I didn't really want to go work for free to try to build something up and try to figure something out. So I was like, how else could I get involved in startup world without actually being a startup founder? And I said, well, I could go into angel investing. And I said, okay, how would you do that if you wanted to get started and you never done that before, and you didn't know a good company from a bad company? So I said, hey, every time in my 9 to 5 career, if I didn't know how to do something, I would always find people that did know how to do it. And I would do that by networking. I do that by going to the places that the people I needed to connect with were at. So
Hmm.
I could do the same for an angel investing. I would go, hey, how do you get plugged in? Well, there's startup founders probably hang out at incubators. They probably hang out at pitch contests. So I started finding out where those places were, and I just, called them up or sent emails to people. I said, hey, I'm looking to be in this space. I don't have a lot of experience in it, but I do have knowledge and connections. And can I donate my time to support the group in however way that might be? And hopefully I'll learn some stuff along the way. And so they're like, yeah, come on down, and they start introducing you to different founders and different investors or different people within the space. You're basically leaving an industry, and you're getting plugged into an ecosystem of startups, which is just another industry. And if you don't know anybody, you have to start networking. And then the more you start showing up, the more people you start meeting, the more friends you start making. And before you know it, you're kind of plugged in. And that's what I started doing. And I guess the skills and the knowledge and the background I had around construction and the way the industry kind of functions, clean tech made a lot of sense because a lot of the way that it's sold through the channels, the people doing it, it kind of has a related industry, because clean tech tends to go into construction, but the way it's distributed, kind of, the same way that building materials get distributed. So it just kind of started feeling like the right niche. I started making more connections within that area, and that's how I got started advising a few companies within the clean tech startup space.
So I'm going to ask one because I think that's interesting. So take this, hey, I need to be where startups are. I need to be where investors are. I need to be where everybody's at. That's where I need to figure out how to get to in order to be successful. But so one question, I guess two questions I have, more than one. One is, so did you go into that saying, hey, this is how I'm going to build my next business or might get my next idea? or is it more of, more of just, hey, I know I need to be surrounded by these, these people. So when I have that next idea, when I have that next business, I have my network, or kind of, was it going in with the intention, hey, I'm going to build a business, or I just want to expand my network so the next time I build a business? And I know it's hard to do a compound question. I'm going to ask one more, which is, while you were doing that, did you still keep the 9 to 5 job? Did you take a period of time off, or how did you make that transition?
So the first part of your question, it was more with the intention of like, hey, I want to be connected in the startup industry. I don't have an idea. I'm not there to build a business, but I'm there to discover, let's call it your voice, and just say like, hey, where can I fit in? And you talk a lot of times, we bet on the founders, not necessarily the idea sometimes, right? So sometimes you don't have to have the idea, but if you want to get connected to the right people,
Hmm.
that you could brainstorm an idea, or you could support in other ways, or maybe you could leverage your expertise that they don't have, or they could leverage their expertise that you don't have. That's where it was at. It's just like, hey, I just need to go in this space, and if I go there long enough, I'm going to get connected to the right people. So if you were expecting to like go get the next Facebook to come knock on your doorstep, you want to invest in us, that's not going to happen. You have to go where those people are going to go. They're maybe going to make you the introduction. So I did it strictly to develop a network.
Hmm.
And I did not quit my 9 to 5 job. I did this purely on the side. A lot of the stuff happens after hours, or it's on weekends, or whatever it could be. If somebody said, hey, you want to take a phone call, I would take a phone call. You want to meet somebody for lunch, I'd go meet them for lunch. You want to have a coffee, and I was just very much whoever was offered as an introduction. I was just like, hey, I'm trying to learn and get plugged in, and every bit, regardless of the outcome of the meeting, would be a bit of knowledge I would gain that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I just kind of just was very open minded about trying to get as much connections as I could and just see where it took me.
No, I think that's interesting. So then you did that, and you said it for about a period of 5 years, right? Over a period, you kind of said you took about 5 years, I think, if I remember our conversation, to build your network. So then, how did you leverage that, or how did that transition to what you're doing now, or how did that play out? So you built that network, you invested what would have been a lot of time and effort over a long period of time, and how did
Hmm.
that transition?
So it started off, I was growing my network within the construction industry with more intention over the last 5 years. Like not, I'd kind of been casual about it prior to that. I started building it with more intention. Then when I started getting plugged into the startup space, I was being very intentional about that. But at the same time, I didn't put two and two together. So
Hmm.
I was, um, thinking like, okay, I don't know anything about coding, but maybe I know how to do a business, or maybe I know marketing, or maybe I can fit this role in here, or maybe I could help people with their pitches. And I was not quite sure where I would fit in.
Hmm.
But as I started getting connected to the clean tech people, I started realizing that the support they needed were, hey, did you know that your product would probably get sold in this fashion? Like it's not like a B2C type deal where you're going to sell it on the internet. You're going to sell it through distributors and wholesalers. And I know these people that represent products that are like yours. They're compatible with yours. So let me make some introductions here. Or, hey, do you know that there's codes being written right now that your product could influence how the codes are written? And
Hmm.
so let me introduce you to some people I know over here that know a lot of people in this code writing spot. So what I started finding is my expertise was this network of people I had within the space of where they were trying to get their products into, right? So I was able to start bridging their introduce. So they were getting me introduced to the startup side of the world, and I was getting them introduced to the places where they were going to find their customers. And I was kind of helping them to navigate. And it didn't really dawn on me that those two things were going to be related when I went into it. But
Hmm.
I think that's why it's important to be open-minded to just kind of like see where the journey takes you, because you might not know where you're going to make the biggest impact, and that might not be apparent to you right away, and then you're going to make connections along the way that are going to be beneficial to both sides of it.
Oh, no, that makes perfect sense. So now, fast forwarding to today, you've done all that, you started to make those connections, you've invested that time and effort. Where did that land you today, or what are you up to today, and how did that transition go for you?
Right now, I'm still working with my 9 to 5 job, and I'm still working with the clean tech startups. I'm still trying to grow their businesses. I'm trying to be more intentional about finding other startups to work with, and along the same lines,
Mm,
in a sense of like a casual conversation that might turn into a more formal relationship. So a lot of times it starts off with, "Hey, let's grab a coffee. Let's talk about what you're up to. Let's see if there's a fit. Let's see if there's advice. Let's see if there's help that we can each mutually do for each other." And if it starts making sense, we just start looking at like, hey, what might an agreement be for working together in an advisor role? And
mm.
then from there, we take it and try to get people connected where they need to and help, turn people that are founders into CEOs, get them ready, wherever they're in for their funding rounds. Like maybe they don't have any, they're looking to get some seeds, or maybe they got some seed, they're looking to get to the next level. Is try to get them, polished up and cleaned up the best possible way so that they're putting their best foot forward.
Okay, no, it makes sense. So now as you're doing that, what's the next? You take, 6 months to a year type of a time frame. You're saying is the intent, hey, I'm going to continue to build this out. I'm going to get a new startup idea and I'm going to spin out. I'm going to keep the 9 to 5, or where do you kind of see that going? Because I think that that's for a lot of, people that are entrepreneur minded, they get caught in a bit of the catch 22 in the sense the nine to five job is something that provides that income, it provides that stability, and yet they want to do the entrepreneur, they want to do their startup, they want to do their own business, they want to grow something that's their own rather than working for someone else, and yet are hesitant to make the jump because you don't want to lose that stability, you don't want to have no or go out and fail, or put everything on that you built on the line, so to speak. So where do how do you make that balance, and where do you see things headed for you?
So for me, I'm looking to continue to advise.
Hmm.
First step is to take something, have an exit that's successful, and then see where that like might land, which might leverage the ability to continue advising as like a full-time role
Hmm.
and give back and educate. I'm not so certain I'm going to be the one that's going to come up with this brilliant idea and be able to put in the 80 to 90 hours it takes to grow something. But I think where I'm at in my life stage is I have a lot of knowledge to give back, but I still have a lot of energy to grow something new. So I
Hmm.
see myself maybe moving more into a full-time angel investor role, advisor role. Also, creating some other maybe not necessarily startup ideas, but more coaching entrepreneurial stuff that could also fill in and support, but be able to allow some freedom to do the angel investing and the advisory full time.
Okay, no, it makes sense. So now, if you're to last question, or I always say last question, I should really stop saying that because I always have a whole bunch more questions. But if you're to say take that and say now you have somebody that maybe wants to do the same thing, they want to say, hey, I like my 9 to 5, or I like the stability, or want to keep going with that, but I do want to be involved with startups, or I want to be involved with small businesses. I want to be, whether it's an advisor, or want to mentor, want to be on the board, or want to contribute. Maybe I'm not the guy that founds it, but I want to be involved with them. What would be your advice to them, or how would you start out or setting yourself up to do that?
I would say it depends on what you want to accomplish, right? So if you said, I want to work my 9 to 5 job, but I want to be the startup founder or the CEO of the company, there is going to come a point in your business where you can't do both, right? You're going to
Hmm.
either have to keep your 9 to 5 and bring in some people to manage the business for you, or you're going to have to leave your job and go manage the business. So if you want to be the CEO, if you want to be the guy calling all the shots, you're either going to have a side business, a side hustle, which is okay. But if you
Hmm.
want to grow a startup business, it's going to take scale to grow and do, big things and change the world. You're going to have to uh, transition that way. But if you said, hey, look, I don't see myself going and working for a startup. I don't see myself, taking the risk, but I want to support. I
Hmm.
think there's a good opportunity there to still advise through like mentorships, advice through as an investor, advice through like a syndicate, those type of things to help people where they need help at, and be able to give back and lend a help. Because I think one of the things um, that I believe is the ecosystem surrounding a startup community is super, super important, right? Because you have people coming into your area where you live and they're trying to build businesses. And if they build a successful business, they're going to have some influence in other, they build a business that says it's got like 200, 300, 450 people, working there. That's going to trigger other things in the economy. People are going to want to live there. There's going to be supports, restaurants, other services that support them. But if there's not a good support of that ecosystem, that business is going to leave and go with it. So if you say, hey, I want to create this business, but there's no investors here, where are they going to go? They're going to go someplace where the investors are. They're going to go like, the typical Silicon Valley. But if the business is good, then the investors will also come to that ecosystem and support it.
Mm,
And so if you want to keep the ecosystem growing, you have to have a mix of the local community, the governments and that stuff, creating an ecosystem that's good and supportive to build businesses and attractive for investors to go into.
mm.
The companies want to be there. They need to have good businesses with good ideas, or the investors aren't going to be there. And if those good government policies are in place and the good businesses are there, you need to be able to attract the investors to come into that area and put money into them. Otherwise, those things are going to leave. Without all three happening, you're just going to have, it's going to fizzle out. And I think that's one thing that a lot of towns and cities that are trying to build these ecosystems, they're lacking one of the three,
Mm.
and they're all kind of interrelated to me.
No, I think that makes perfect sense. So now, as we transition towards the end of the podcast, unfortunately, never have enough time to talk about all the topics that would be fun to talk about. But I always have two questions I ask at the end of the podcast. So the first question I always ask is, so what was the worst business decision you ever made?
The worst business decision I ever made was probably taking our online wine shop into a brick and mortar location, and we did not think through the location very well. And that basically ate up all the cash very quickly. And cash is king when it comes to the business. And that's usually the reason why most businesses fail is you run out of cash. And we just
Mm.
had a bad location and a monthly rent payment that was due every month, and it just was a slow bleed dry.
No, and I think that's one that it's easy to get excited over. Hey, we got a new location, and we got to hey, it's something tangible. If we build it, they will come type of a thing. And yet, too often, you don't account for hey, now when we build this, we are now, as you meant, we have a set burn. We have to pay the rent, we have to pay for the assets or for the stock and for everything else. And sometimes, if you don't do all of that homework ahead of time, you can set yourself up to where you burn through all the cash much more quickly and don't give yourself that runway in order to be successful. So I think that's certainly a good lesson to learn. So second question I always ask is, so if now you're talking to a start or someone that's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
Get customers first. I think if you can find customers, you're going to find investment. And so many times I talk with startup founders and they're like, if I only can get the money, if I can get $10 million, I can build this thing and we can go get our customers.
Mm,
And every pitch contest you ever go to, and if you ask any judge or you ask anybody that does, why did you pick the winner? It's always they had an existing customer base. They had already proven it was. So if you can go out and take your concept and get customers around it, people willing to pay money for the idea you have, you are far more likely to attract investment. You're far more likely to be able to grow your idea, and you're far more likely to make it successful. So too many people get caught up in the idea and the development of the idea, and then they'll go get customers. I say, no, do it the other way. Take your idea, go find customers, and then find a way to build it. Because usually the building of it is pretty easy if you already got the people willing to pay for it. When it's the other way around, you've invested a lot of money trying to get an idea off the ground, then go find customers, then you're struck because if they don't like what you're selling, then you got something you dumped a bunch of money in that you can't do anything with.
No, and I completely agree with that. And it's one that I've run businesses both ways. Both of them have been successful, thank goodness. But I think that, the ones that have been easier, the ones that have been growing quicker, the ones that you're less cash strapped, the ones that you're having a much easier go of it are the ones that let's get that customer pipeline loaded earlier and you also get the feedback early, right? You get to hear what you, as you're now developing it, you can hear what the customers want or don't want or what's important to them. And you can, and then the last thing I think that with that is that you also get their buy-in, right? If they're now part of the process earlier on, and as you're building it, you're actively getting feedback from them, they're much more likely when the time comes to pay for it or to be an active customer, they're going to want the product because they've already invested a lot, been involved with it, and they're excited about the product launch. So I think that's great advice. And one oftentimes that people first think, I'll build it and then I'll figure out how to sell it. And why not get the customer so that as you're getting ready to sell, you already have the base there. So I think that's great advice. Well, if people want to reach out to you, and I know you have a podcast and you do other things and you do advising and whatnot, what is the best way for people to reach out to you, find out more about you, or get involved?
Easiest place is to go to my website, natepeo.com. From there, you can connect to the website, you can connect to the podcast, and you can connect to all my social media, and you can see everything I got going on right there. So that'd be the central hub, natepeo.com.
And that's just NATE and then PE or PEO.com, right?
Correct. natepeo.com.
All right, perfect. Well, I certainly invite everybody to go to your website, check you out, connect up with you, become listener of your podcast as well, and everything else in between. Well, thank you, Nate, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. For those of you that are have your own inventive journey to tell or your journey to tell, make sure to apply to be a guest on the podcast at inventivejourneyguest.com. And certainly, if you're a listener, make sure to click subscribe so you get notifications when this episode and all the other great future episodes air. And lastly, if you ever need help with patents and trademarks, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law. We love helping startups and small businesses. Nate, thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to seeing how your journey goes and wish you even a better next leg of your journey, even better than the last.
Thank you so much for having me on.